Welcome to What the Health? The podcast where anything health is fair game. There's a lot of garbage advice and misinformation out there that can leave you feeling stumped and stuck. Together, let's sift through the sea of BS and find the best ways to get healthy and stay healthy. Join the team as we tackle the trends and bust the myths about health and wellness. Here are your hosts, Dr. Dan Turo, Angela Turo, and Dr. Riley Brown.
Welcome back to another episode. I'm Dr. Dan.
Dr. Riley here.
All right, so we're just going to jump right into it. Let's talk about tech neck.
Yep.
Heard so many, again, it's such a buzzword in today's society, but what do we actually mean when we talk about tech neck?
Bad posture. Yeah, I think that's the simplest way to put it. Tech neck. So technology obviously is more prevalent in today's society with cell phones and computers and all. I feel like all homework and stuff has gone to an iPad or on the computer. Yeah. So I don't think the posture is new in terms of like reading a book, when technology wasn't present, or writing and stuff. You were still looking down. I think it's the prolonged position that you're in, you're watching videos or whatever. So, when I think of tech neck, I think of, it's a kid looking down at the iPad watching a video for, half an hour to an hour.
Yeah.
But that's at least what my thought is.
So why is that so detrimental?
It's abnormal. It's not abnormal movement. The spine should be able to move in that way, but you're putting a lot of stress on the spinal, column itself. But postural muscles, that's not normal posture. Head's supposed to be over the shoulders. So when you have that head dropping forward, I always think about the posture muscles in the back just working triple overtime to try and keep the head back and upright.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing, again, a lot of times people always go to the back of the head, but then you think about like how that impacts in the front. And so what happens is when you're in this position, everything here gets contracted. And so it shortens over time because it's constantly in that shortened position. So they tighten in the contracted position, this direction. And then even though these are tight back here, tightness doesn't necessarily equate to strength, right? Yeah. Because you're not necessarily engaging those muscles. Yeah. So what happens is you literally, the term neuroplasticity, right? Nerves and, neurons that fire together, wire together. Well, you also have that impact, when you're talking about the strength of a muscle, you're also adding, and improving neuromuscular connection. So, if one nerve fiber starts to branch out and feed more muscle fibers, that's a good thing. But a muscle, as it starts to atrophy, can actually lose some of those connections, right? So you are, when you're not activating the muscles, but they're just stretched in that position, they'll elongate in the back here, but then because you're not activating them in a healthy way, then you literally start to lose that neuromuscular connection and muscles will tighten, but, so they'll constantly, feel tight, but it's because they're weak, because they haven't been engaged in a proper way. So, I think of, say you broke your arm or something, you're in a cast for months like this, and then you get out of that cast, like, your bicep is going to be nice and tight. That does not mean it's strong. So, it's a similar aspect of you're in an improper position, shortened the muscle for, months on end, and then it feels tight, but that's not strength. Exactly. So, the difference between tight, versus strengthening, and it's amazing, just the simple awareness, right? Of, hey, just lift your chest up. And that's what I usually tell people is lift your chest, because if you lift your chest, your shoulders automatically will come back and down into a more neutral, healthy position, whereas if you're leading with your head, okay, again, it doesn't mean you can't get into those positions like you said. Like the body is designed to get there, but it's the prolonged stress over time. So, me looking down and reading something on my phone for 5 minutes, checking an email or something is much different than a teenager who's curled up on the couch, in their, or in their bed, with their feet up, and, they're scrolling through there for hours at a time. That's a significant detriment. Our body was not designed to be in that position. Other than when we sleep, we're not designed to be static for, for hours on end. And so many of us are.
Yeah, my daughter loves watching Winnie the Pooh, and so I had that on for the other day, and we were sitting on the couch, and I did not have the best posture on the couch, I'll admit that. But I was watching her just sit there and watch. I mean, she was not, not resting on the couch. She was sitting there. And I was just like amazed at how perfect her posture was while she was sitting there watching the TV. And it just kind of goes to show that you are, innately designed to have that decent posture. Same thing with belly breathing. You're supposed to breathe through the diaphragm, but a lot of people breathe up through the chest. So I think the posture thing has become worse with the increased use of technology. It's not new, like I said earlier, but I think, the whole correcting it aspect needs to be more prevalent.
But again, kids used to go out and play a lot more.
Yeah.
So, they would go out and they'd, activate the muscles on the playground, on the, monkey bars. I actually am not aware of, but I'd be interested to see percentages of kids at what age could do the monkey bars, nowadays versus what it was, 2-3 decades ago. And, I'd be interested to see if that has gone downhill. I don't know if anyone's done that research, but it's kids don't go outside and play as much anymore. And part of that is because society has changed. I think there's more dangers and stuff out there, but being able to get up and move around, you're even starting to see school programs recognize, especially for young boys, when they're, stuck in a classroom all day long. I see my daughter, and you probably see your daughter, my daughter can sit and play by herself and, quietly and, no problem, be very, very meticulous with things. But, you put a boy, in a room and ask him to settle, before you know it, they're going to be up and dive bombing off of, and again, don't get me wrong, my daughter does that too, but usually it's stimulated by her older brothers, but but again, you take boys and put them in a room and expect them to sit there for 8 hours of school in a day, and it's no wonder they're antsy. So it's this idea of trying to incorporate education with the physical activity and bringing the physical learning, is extremely important. And again, that just goes to overall, muscle tone. Are they building a good, healthy neuromuscular system, so that in turn leads to, better brain development, better education, and, just more, awareness of, overall, health and well-being as they grow and develop.
Yeah. So. I think obviously you want to nip it in the butt early with posturing in kids and trying to reduce, or if they are on their phone or whatever, making sure they have a decent posture with it. But even in the working class, a lot of stuff is on the computer or remote, and so obviously an office desk job is not ideal, but I feel if you're going into the office, you would at least be at a chair at a desk where you could have some posture. Now that everything's remote, there's probably a lot of couch working going on. Yeah. And that's just, I know from my couch, it doesn't make good posture.
Well, it's so funny you bring that up because, I had a gentleman who just started care recently, and, he came in for some pretty bad headaches because, of how he was working at his job very physically demanding. So he was working on a machine, but he was having to look up over his head. And so that triggered a really nasty migraine headache that just would not go away for several weeks. Finally came in, and within a couple of adjustments, headache's gone. But we didn't analyze the low back when he came in because his headache was so severe, and like that was his primary concern. Well, 2 weeks later, now his low back flared up, because as we start to change the stress and actually take stress off the spine in one area, it can show up in another area. I call that whack-a-mole, right? You remove the stress in one area and boom, it pops up somewhere else. But, and it's not that the stress wasn't there in the low back, it was, but it was just being quieted by, how intense everything was up top. So now that was clear, now we went and analyzed his low back, and this just happened last night. And he's got an extremely flat lower spine, right where you should have a nice healthy curve in the low spine, same as in the neck. You should have a forward curve in the neck, forward curve in the low back. Well, it was completely flat. Well, after a little bit of a conversation, he's like, well, years ago, if, we weren't, if we were on duty, but like there wasn't a lot of work to be done, we would just sit in our truck and we would put our feet up. So it'd literally be like in this, feet crunched up position and like slouched forward. And again, they were probably, watching, something on their phone or just, or maybe even just resting, sleeping in that position. But I look at his lower spine and it's like, everything is crunched forward, showing arthritis. And, he's only in his, late 30s, early 40s, but it's like, significant, change in that spine. And again, he probably did that for years, and he probably had some early childhood, injuries from jumping and playing with sports, and that stuff manifests. We can see that, not only injuries, but improper development of the spine from the get-go.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. Like, your daughter, you saw her watching, her TV, her TV or her device, but if I see my kids, from a young age, if I see them like this on the couch, like sit up, or I'll have them lay on your belly, because then when they lay on their belly, then they automatically have to lift up their head to look at the screen in front of them. And again, don't get me wrong, like, we're not advocating for long screen time, but if while they're doing it, a while, if they can sit up with good, healthy posture, that will, it will make a difference. Even if I'm driving with my oldest son in the car, and he's looking down at his phone, I'll like reach across and like push his head back to the seat, and then he brings his phone up. And, it's like, it's all those little things, and it's not like, doing that for a half hour in your lifetime is going to make a world of difference. But, you do that for, 2, 3, 4 hours a day and multiply that times 365 days and then do that over 10, 20 years. Now all of a sudden you have a spine that has not ever developed a good, healthy curve. And that's what we started seeing, right? Like several decades ago, primary areas of complaints, just speaking from chiropractors who are several decades ahead of me in practice, they would say like, it was the middle of the neck was like the primary, concern. And I think that was from, a lot of car accidents. Cars weren't as, built for safety, right? So they didn't have those crumple zones. So I think whiplashes were probably a little bit more severe. Football, there's a lot more safety rules now, in contact sports than there were, 20, 30 years ago. So, the types of subluxation patterns, locks or misalignments in the spine, were more in the middle of the neck, at least, primarily. Nowadays, I would argue that probably at least 80% of people that come in, especially if they're younger than 30, have this lower neck, upper back subluxation, like C7, T1, T2, which is where the neck goes into the upper back. I would argue that, at least 80% have, and it doesn't mean they don't have other areas to address in the spine, but it's, they have that area of dysfunction because they're constantly forward. And I had a conversation with a colleague of mine. I remember him saying, like, if I could develop a system where it's like I only adjusted one bone, he's like, I'd probably adjust T3. And again, T3 is like the anchor point, in the beginning of the lower part of the neck as that neck starts to come up all the way up into the skull. So,
that'd be a good one. Right?
That'd be a good one, right?
Good, I think about, you're supposed to develop these curves to the spine because when you're born, you're in the fetal position, the spine is a C, and as the baby starts to roll over from their back to their belly and start to pick their head up, then you get that curve developed. And so, you have a primary curve that looks like a C, and then you develop these secondary curves through every part of the spine. But, it's almost, when you have these handheld devices, you're almost trying to reverse back to that, infancy type of spine. That's just not how it's supposed to be, positioned.
Yeah. And again, it impacts. So it's like, what are some of the things then that we see come into our office? And, we're seeing, young kids, headaches, breathing challenges, especially like, your asthmas or like your restricted breathing, anxiety, just feelings of like heart palpitations or, because again, they're constantly like this. So everything is closed down. And the nerve supply that comes out of that lower neck, upper back feeds a lot of that chest wall and the heart and the lungs. And so, you have these feelings of like just anxiety, tightness that, you go in your medical doctor and they want to do this EKG and look at, heart and lungs, and it all comes back normal, but they still like have this just feeling of like they don't feel right.
Yeah.
And again, we analyze them, and again, 80-90% of the time they've got that lower neck, upper back subluxation misalignment, and we adjust that, and the symptoms like go away. It's incredible like how connected it all is.
Yeah. If I don't see like a T1 or T2, that upper back on somebody, I'm honestly shocked. They're either very young and not exposed to, handheld devices, or, they're chiropractors or patients. So
I would say, or the, the people who don't have a desk job, or their job is a little bit more manually intensive. I see it all the time. Like people who have, manual labor intensive jobs, their curves are much better, at least in some parts. And that, that example I just gave, he had a really good neck curve, but his low back was terrible. It's interesting. And again, that would get to the primary of like, is back, impacting up or, top down? And that's what we help to unwind in the office. But that tech neck, really, it starts from that young age, right? Like you've got it, kids start looking at devices as early as, 2-3 years old. Again, not recommending that. Try and hold off on devices as long as you can. But again, we understand, both of us as parents, like sometimes it's nice just to like, look, distraction for 30 minutes so I can go, take the trash out, run the vacuum, clean something, put toys away, whatever the case is. But we can't allow that as parents to be the full-time babysitter, because that just really impacts, kids' neurological, musculature development. So it starts young, and you've got to have that awareness. Like, again, it's been thrown around that like sitting is the new smoking, right? Sitting is as detrimental to the body and the spine as smoking is to the lungs, and it really is true. Like as we sit in the chair. So
I just wonder too if there's research about kids or lower population in terms of age, like having more disc issues and stuff like that, because you think about all that posture, and I would have to find the research on it, but they did a study on the force on the discs itself with certain sitting positions and standing and stuff. And I think the worst position was seated with the lower back rounded. I'm pretty sure that had the most force on the lower back discs. And so, I wonder, so we see a lot of kids now that kind of have this random low back pain, and obviously you look at the x-ray and you see some pretty wicked tilts in the pelvis and stuff. But I just wonder if there's going to be, in 20 or 30 years, you see that population have more degenerative disc disease and stuff in the lower back than typical.
Yeah, certainly possible. Well, you even see, we hear stories all the time, right? Oh, I was just sitting, or I bent over to pick up my empty laundry basket, or just bent over to pick up my, pants to put them on, or I went to put my pants on in the morning, and boom, my back just gave out.
Yeah.
And it's like, that wasn't the injury. That was the straw that literally broke the camel's back or broke your back. But like, that was the last bit of stress that you can tolerate. And so again, helping people understand when they come in, especially when you're starting chiropractic care in your 30s, 40s and beyond, it's like your spine has had 3 to 4 decades of experience. I like to call it experience, right? But accumulation of stress over time. And, the birth process can be traumatic to the spine. The learning how to, sit up and, falling over, learning how to walk, falling on your butt, learning how to crawl, biking, starting to run, run real fast and boom, you hit your head off of something on a corner, or, you fall forward and catch yourself and, boom, your shoulders fall backwards. And then you move on to your contact sports, even into soccer, kids are bumping and pushing each other, headers, with soccer balls, football, hockey, just go down the list. And then even instruments, my son's in marching band and I see some of these kids, carrying these, massive trombones. And again, they're holding their instruments up here, in that repetitive movement. They're holding a tuba on their back, the percussion, have the big, harnesses on, holding their drums up. And at least that forces good posture, right? But again, if it's on there and you have a little bit of a tilt, in your shoulders because of, your, one-sided handedness or an early injury, what you're doing now is you're actually, you're ingraining that injury and asymmetry more and more, right? We always use the example of hammering a nail, right? If you take a nail and you hammer it, it's a straight nail, fresh, and you hammer it straight down and you're good. Good carpenter, 1, 2, boom, that nail is in. For us amateurs, okay, we hit that nail, boom, we bend it a little bit. Well, now we've just screwed it, right? We're never going to get that nail back to perfect. And if you keep tapping it, you can try and straighten it back out, but if you keep tapping that, it's going to bend further and further. And so that idea of, someone who had an injury young in childhood, we're resilient. They don't necessarily feel it, or maybe they're sore for a day or two. And, boom, then they're fine. They tell mom and dad maybe they're sore. They don't tell them at all. And then it's they're sore, but their body's gone out of alignment. And now they continue to grow and develop. And now you're adding sports on top of that. You're adding, a backpack or, drums or, an instrument or, you go down the list. And so it's you continue to add that stress on the spine until you get to the point where now you're, in your 20s or 30s and, your body's dehydrated, you slept funny and, you bend over and nope, everything just gives out. And then you're on the floor and then you're either calling the urgent care to get medication, going to the ER because you don't know what to do, or hopefully you call your chiropractor, although we're going to tell you that, yes, the pain just started, or maybe you had a little bit minor aches and pains leading up to that, but that severe acute pain just started 2 days ago. But then we take an x-ray and we look no, there's 30 years of experience in your spine here that led to, the giving out. So, again, it's it always amazes me, if you would go to a dentist and didn't take care of your teeth for 20, 30 years, you wouldn't go in and say, oh, just clean them up, doc, and, I'll be good. I just want to come for 1 or 2 visits. The dentist's going to look at you like you're crazy, right? So, when we as the chiropractors, we see 30 years of experience in the spine, we're going to tell you look, this is going to take, it might take a couple weeks and you'll start feeling better. But if you really want to work to strengthen the damage that has been done to the spine over 2 or 3 decades, it's going to take some time and repetition, right? Which is all the more important to get checked and adjusted when you are young, because now you allow that spine to grow and develop healthfully, not under a stressed or subluxation position.
Yeah, especially with, like I said, the increase in technology and then moving into because I think, you had a good point of kids don't play outside as much as they used to. And then I feel like that would almost be like a spiral into, okay, then they get a desk job.
There you go.
And then it just amplifies. And so you have, this 30-year-old or 40-year-old who's got chronic low back pain, looking at surgery and stuff like that, when all it needed was a little bit of correction in terms of posture and stuff.
Yeah, you got it. So what can people look for, especially like, for their kids or their grandkids, what signs would they see in their child to say like, hey, maybe they should get checked, or maybe there's something going on here with this technology.
Yeah. Obviously, just looking at their posture, you study them for a week and you see that they're looking down for, an hour or two every day. Like that should be a telltale sign like, hey, let's maybe adjust that. But even, I think any symptoms in anybody is abnormal, but for kids to have symptoms of,
especially headaches.
Yeah, headaches or, visual disturbances. Now if they have, glasses and stuff, that's different. But yeah, headaches, visual disturbances, breathing, even, like bedwetting and stuff like that. Like that is common. But if you're, just at the end of the day, any symptom in a child is extremely abnormal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's common. It's not normal.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. That's the big thing we talk about. So yeah, self trying to click or pop the neck, that's a very, very big red flag. That it's like if you see them constantly trying to click pop their own neck, like that's their body trying to self-adjust. And so if you get them in now when they're young, before they develop, before they fully mature with that, subluxation in there, you're gonna really, really help them down the road. So it's like, I feel like we've been talking more and more about kids because it's not that we don't help adults, but again, it takes more time with an adult to recover some of the experience from the spine. If you get them in as a child, a toddler, a child or adolescent, before they hit spinal maturity, you have a much greater chance of getting that spine as healthy as possible, and then much easier to keep it that way throughout their life, barring any major massive injuries.
I think we see all the adults that come into our office. We're like, all right, let's help the kids out.
Exactly.
The popular, obviously they come in for a reason, but they're hurting the majority of the time.
Absolutely. So yeah, if you see any of those signs we just discussed, or you have any other questions about whether or not technology could be hindering you or someone in your family, do not hesitate to reach out. And even if you're not in our area, we'll do our best to help you find someone that can get you the help you need. So thanks for stopping by. We'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of What the Health? The podcast where anything health is fair game, with your hosts, Dr. Dan, Angela, and Dr. Riley. Brought to you by Churro Family Chiropractic. If you'd like to learn more about some of the resources mentioned on this show, or you have questions about something that was discussed, please reach out through our website at www.turofamilychiropractic.com. Remember to like and subscribe to What the Health Podcast to catch all the latest episodes and replay your favorites. Thank you for listening, and remember, we're always here to help when you find yourself saying, "What the hell?"